Good afternoon, Evil, and I will tell you one story of a good viewing. Greg first noticed the cracks in his vision on a damp Tuesday morning, the glassy surface of his bathroom mirror groaning as though struck by unseen fists. He touched the fogged pane and recoiled, finding red handprints blooming beneath his fingertip. Nothing in him registered panic. Instead, his pulse slid into an even rhythm as though he had waited years for this moment. At the clinic, his doctor, Dr. Halvorsen, greeted him with a practiced smile that never quite reached his eyes. Each word he spoke rippled in Greg's mind like static, his voice distant and humming with secrets Greg was only beginning to decipher. When Halvorsen pressed the stethoscope to Greg's chest, Greg felt the instrument slip through flesh, cold metal sliding down a tunnel of teeth and bone. A laugh bubbled in his throat, low and monstrous, but when he looked up, the doctor's expression had softened to concern. "You're safe here," Halvorsen whispered. "You'll be fine." In the sterile hallway, the lights flickered and hissed. The walls, painted a dull institutional green, seemed to pulse, swelling outward before recoiling like lungs. As fear swelled in Greg's chest, he realized the floor beneath him was alive. Strands of carpet curled and reached upward, snapping at his heels. He tore free and ran toward the exit, but the door remained stubbornly shut. In its narrow window, he saw himself cowering in the reception area, a child in a cracked porcelain doll mask. That night, the dreams began. A pale woman wandered through his memories, trailing whispers that crawled beneath his scalp. She wore his mother's face but spoke his father's voice, reciting sins he'd never committed. Ash rained from the ceiling as she moved closer until the room dissolved into black water. He woke screaming, tangled in sheets heavy with dampness. When he reported this to Halvorsen, the doctor's eyes glazed over. "It's progress," he said softly. "You're getting better." "Better?" Better was screaming at 2:13 a.m. as taps of water pelted the ceiling above his bed, revealing long cracks leaking dark rivulets down the walls. Better was finding a pale yellow stain on his pillow in the shape of a mouth that smiled when he blinked. Halvorsen watched Greg through one-way glass, scribbling notes in a leather-bound journal. In the gallery, the walls writhed with shadowed figures. Some stood too tall, limbs too long, others crouched, gaping holes where their faces should be. The doctor's pen scratched pages. Greg imagined the glass fractured, the shards slithering over him as vermin burrowing into his flesh. By the third week, Greg's reflection had forsaken him entirely. Each morning, he saw new masks masquerading as his face in polished metal. One dawn, the mirror showed a creature with wide, unblinking eyes and too many teeth. It leaned forward, hissing, "Run." He bolted down the corridor. The clinic doors yawned open onto an endless field of black sand under a bleeding sky. The nurse's station was empty, wheelchairs spun in tight circles, wheels whispering his name. The grass around him groaned, bending into shapes that formed words, "You belong here." He fled, though he did not know why. The sky darkened to a bruised purple as thunder rattled the horizon. In his panic, he turned and saw the doctor walking toward him across the sand, dragging a gurney shrouded in white cloth. With each step, footprints blossomed in his wake, tiny corpses, hands outstretched, mouths stuck in silent screams. Halvorsen stopped and whispered, "You can't leave." Greg ran on, the beach stretching until it swallowed the clinic's facade. The sand was cold and alive, vines snaking around his ankles. He pitched forward, at his fingertips the gurney's cloth whipped open. Inside lay Halvorsen, eyes closed, chest unmoving, except for a single, pulsing heartbeat visible beneath translucent skin. As Greg stared, horrified, conscious thought flickered out. He awakened strapped to a table in an obsidian room, overseen by Halvorsen in his patient's garb, hospital greens toiled with fraying edges. The doctor's forehead was stitched across with ruined sinew. He hummed quietly, the tune of a lullaby Greg knew from childhood. The stitching twitched and Halvorsen spoke, but his voice shattered into a chorus of cries. Greg's sanity unraveled like fine silk pulled through bloodied fingers. The man he thought was the healer became the haunted, and the walls closed in, alive with tormenting laughter. A single word repeated in Greg's head, "Inside." He looked down at his hands, they were Halvorsen's. The ones he had consulted for answers were his own flesh. As the lights fizzled and the door behind him swallowed the last gleam of day, he realized the worst of hallucinations was the one he could not escape, himself. The air pulsed with a stink of rot and antiseptic. Walls of ribbed metal closed in and the table beneath him shifted like living scoliosis. Corridors opened as if in his mind, each leading to impossible chambers where patients writhed behind barred windows. One whispered his name by pressing its lips against cool glass, its tongue flicking out in steady rhythm. In the room down the hall, a patient painted portraits in blood, each eyelash he added seemed to sprout on his canvas, shimmering against dried gore. Another circled the room on his hands, eyes gone white, muttering, "We are the cure." Their voices flooded Greg's skull, each syllable crackling like old film. Halvorsen approached from behind, his stitched yellow eyes glinting with pity. He pressed a cold metal device into Greg's skull, and white noise exploded behind his eyelids. Memories flooded through, a childhood house collapsing, his father's silhouette distorting in shattered glass, a lullaby warping into war drums. Dawn colors bled across his vision, and he woke again, this time in a narrow cell, floor slick with something sticky and warm. He crawled forward and found imprints on the floor, outlines of bodies contorted in agony. He traced one with his fingertip, it pulsed under his touch, and he heard a ragged gasp rising from below. The floorboard splintered, and a face, pale and quivering, emerged. It smiled, a crooked grin half-choked by shreds of flesh. He recoiled, and the face vanished, the boards snapping back together. Above the cell, a voice droned into a rusted intercom, "Session will begin." The hatch overhead rattled. A metal dolly rolled through the hatch on corroded wheels, carrying a vat of steaming, ink-black fluid. Its surface undulated as if alive, reflecting Greg's wide eyes in fractured pieces. The caretaker who pushed it wore a lab coat peppered with dark stains that pulsed like circuits. He leaned close, and Greg smelled iron and decay. "The cure," the man rasped, voice a chorus of undercurrents, "will save you." The vat's lid clanked open. Thick droplets spilled onto the floor, sizzling where they landed. Something inside shifted, a shape pressing against the opaque liquid, twisting arms and legs visible only as silhouettes. Greg felt his own limbs tingle, a compulsion drawing him nearer. As he stepped forward, a distant alarm began to howl, crescendoing to a deafening shriek that reverberated through every nerve. Halvorsen's voice crackled overhead through the intercom, calm and clinical, "Do not resist the process, Greg. Soon, you will understand." Greg lurched backward, slamming his spine into the cell's clammy wall. The ink-black liquid oozed over the vat's rim as though obeying gravity only when watched. When Greg blinked, ribbons of fluid hovered midair, coiling toward him like smoke that had learned to hate. He traced the cracks in the concrete behind him, counting them, anything to anchor his mind, but each fissure multiplied, sprouting tiny, twitching teeth. From the ceiling vent, a wind moaned, carrying the scent of sulfur and wilted lilies. A siren drowned under its own pitch, looping in a rasp that threatened to tear the world's seams. Beneath that howl, Greg heard words, hundreds of voices chanting the lullaby from his childhood, each syllable glutted with nails. "Sleep tight, little marrow, eh. Night chews on your bone, eh. Dreams are the doorways, eh. That swallow you home." The vat shuddered. The caretaker's jaw fell slack, skin splitting like fruit left in the sun. A swarm of black moths poured out of his mouth, wings etched with white eyes that blinked in unison. They blanketed the cell light, reducing the room to a flickering film reel. Greg slapped at them, screams snagging in his throat as wings gummed to his lips and eyelids. A moth the size of his fist settled on his cheek, its eye spots dilating until he saw within them a miniature stage, himself, shackled, applauding his own execution. The caretaker's body collapsed, empty as a deflated suit, and the vat tipped. Liquid crashed across the floor, coating Greg's shoes. Where it touched flesh, it seethed, tunneling upward like reverse veins until it reached his knees. He felt nothing, no burn, no cold, only a numbness that hummed with distant violins. Footsteps. Halvorsen. Yet the doctor wore no stethoscope, no badge. He shuffled in a patient's gown, wrists bound by loose restraints he never bothered to untie. Dried blood ringed the cloth. His eyes, jaundiced and stitched at their corners, gleamed with childish delight. "Greg," he crooned, "you've made remarkable strides. Tell me, do you hear them yet?" Greg tried to speak, but his tongue felt stitched to the roof of his mouth. The ink had reached his ribs, indigo tendrils spreading beneath his skin like fractal lightning. He clawed at his chest. His heartbeat echoed like a drum beneath seawater, slowed, echoing, huge. Halvorsen drifted closer. "We're deep inside the compound now. So deep even the staff forget these halls. The rest of the world is a rumor, Greg. A fairy tale. This is the bone of reality, stripped of its prettiness." He touched the vat's rim, licking a droplet from his finger. Delicious. Behind the doctor, the moth storm thinned, revealing a corridor Greg hadn't seen before. Its floor glistened with the same ink, forming an unbroken mirror reflecting a warped sky. In that reflection, Greg glimpsed children in hospital gowns hanging like marionettes from unseen hooks, their heads bent at impossible angles. One lifted a hand and waved, skin flapping loose around bone. Halvorsen snapped his fingers. The ink on Greg's body hardened, shattering into obsidian scales that clattered to the floor. The liquid receded like a tide, but a throbbing brand remained on Greg's sternum, a spiral of teeth encircling an empty void. "You're ready," said Halvorsen. "Time to see her." A door iris peeled at the corridor's end, petals of rusted iron grinding apart. A hush fell, and the siren choked out. Only Greg's breathing remained a ragged feral. Halvorsen gestured. "After you." Greg walked. With each step, the hallway's fluorescent bulbs snapped and rained sparks, leaving darkness that crawled behind him. The ink mirror floor whispered secrets as their reflections trudged. Who is the dreamer? Who is the cage? They emerged into an atrium domed with stained glass depicting a surgeon eviscerating an hourglass. Beneath the mosaic stood an iron chair welded from restraint bars and scalpels. Beside it hovered her, the pale woman of Greg's dreams, mother mask fused to father voice. She wore a lab coat sewn shut at the sleeves, shaking with something alive beneath the fabric. Halvorsen knelt, supplicant. "Matron, he is distilled." The woman glided forward. Her face rippled half wax, half memory. When she spoke, her mouth did not move. Instead, every loudspeaker in the compound woke and the word dissect echoed from everywhere at once. Scalpels unfolded from the iron chair like metallic petals. Greg turned to flee, but the floor liquefied and hands, childish, skeletal, burst upward, gripping his ankles. They dragged him backward, fingers audibly snapping beneath his weight yet refusing to release. He was swallowed by the chair, straps coiled around his wrists and throat, living leather pulsing with borrowed heartbeats. The matron placed a palm on Greg's forehead. Behind her eyes stormed galaxies of X-ray negatives, each frame a memory he'd never lived, weddings melting into funerals, classrooms flooded with seawater, a Christmas tree strung with intestines instead of tinsel. Gregory Pierce, the compound's loudspeakers bellowed, diagnosis, reality dissolution syndrome. Prognosis, consumption. Scalpels descended. They did not slice skin, they sank through matter, severing layers of perception. Greg saw them carve the color blue from existence, the smell of winter, the feel of his name threading through conversation. Each sense screamed as it was flayed, replaced by emptiness that howled like wind over a graveyard. Yet beneath terror bloomed revelation. He was never a patient, never a visitor. He was the hospital. Each corridor, every cell had grown from thoughts he discarded in moments of guilt or longing. Halvorsen was a phantom caretaker of those cast-offs, the matron their warden. Greg's soul was the boiler pumping madness through arteries of stone. The matron's fingers sank into his chest, not physically but existentially, and extracted a key shaped from orbiting vertebrae. She whispered to Halvorsen, "Unlock the east wing." Halvorsen scuttled away. Greg, half undone, watched as the far wall split open, revealing a void littered with stars and operating tables orbiting in slow gyration. Screams spilled from that wing, some newborn, some centuries old. The hospital was infinite, layered like Nautilus chambers spiraling into deeper horrors. The matron leaned close and her borrowed voices braided into one. "You thought sanity was your anchor. It was only an elevator. Welcome to the basement." She kissed his brow. The kiss burned like dry ice, leaving frostbite that spread across his skull. Reality popped, a soap bubble, and Greg tumbled through 1,000 overlapping memories. In each, he was someone else, a radiologist eating film, a janitor mopping a floor of tongues, a child humming the lullaby in utero. When the plunge ended, he stood alone in a moonlit courtyard. The hospital loomed behind, windows black. Snow drifted, but each flake was an eyelid blinking shut upon landing. Ahead waited a single payphone, receiver dangling, ringing. He answered. Static. Then his own voice, older, weary. "Greg, listen carefully. None of this is real, but it will become real if you pick up the scalpel." "Do not," the line crackled, words dissolving into insect chatter. Behind him, doors burst open. Halvorsen charged, wielding a bone saw that shrieked metal on bone though it touched nothing. Moths swarmed the courtyard lights, bleeding ink that froze into spires. Greg dropped the receiver. Something changed inside him, the sense that roads still existed out there, roads leading home. He ran. Snow eyes shattered underfoot, screaming microtonal hymns. Halvorsen's saw screamed louder. A wrought iron gate appeared, tangled with roses made of surgical wire. Greg ripped through them, flesh tearing. Beyond the gate stretched a highway lit by a color he had no name for, a hue that tasted like hope soaked in ozone. He sprinted. Tires squealed. An ambulance careened from the horizon, siren wailing the lullaby's tune. Its headlights sliced open the night, revealing that the sky was merely a painted ceiling 30 feet high. Greg veered off the asphalt, crashing into weeds that whispered, "You're still here, you're still here." The ambulance doors slammed and Halvorsen stepped out, face split by a smile that climbed to his scalp. "I can't leave, Greg," he said, lifting the saw. "Because I'm you." And I refuse to abandon myself. Greg backed toward the edge of the world where the painted sky met plywood. Wind peeled the horizon like wallpaper, revealing a furnace roar beyond. He felt the seam of reality tear beneath his heels. With a final breath, he leapt. Air vanished. Heat enveloped him, tasting of molten iron and lullabies reversed. Falling, he glimpsed the hospital above, shrinking into a dollhouse ablaze. Tiny Halvorsen clawed at the window, saw raised, shrieking. Then silence. Greg awoke in a small white room. No straps. No ink. Just a desk, a pen, and a mirror. On the desk lay a medical chart labeled Halvorsen G. Diagnosis Reality Dissolution Syndrome. Attending physician, Dr. G. Pierce. Footsteps echoed outside. A key turned in the lock. The door opened. A nurse entered, clipboard in hand. Good morning, Dr. Pierce. Ready for rounds? Greg looked at his reflection, stethoscope around his neck, coat pristine. For a moment, relief glittered. Then his eyes slid from the mirror, and his reflection, no longer bound to him, kept staring, lips curling into a doll-mask grin. In that rictus smile, he heard the lullaby begin again. Thank you very much. See you all in the next video.